Okay, in this lesson we're going to learn about linear transformations and how we can look at just the equation itself and know what changes happened to our graph line from its original graph. So the first thing we want to look at is we're going to kind of go down here to the bottom right corner and we're going to talk about our parent function. Now, if you notice, if you look at your equation, you've got y equals x, you also have f of x equals x. Those are the same equation. I want to show you f of x because I want you to start re-familiarizing yourself with function notation because it's going to start coming back and you need to be able to recognize it. It's just another name for y. So notice, if you look at the equation, our y-intercept is 0, which is its starting point. And then if you look at the slope value is 1. And if you go up 1, right 1, you get back to that solid graph line. And this is the starting point for all lines. So we have been working with y equals mx plus b. We have been working with a graph line who has changed its slope from 1 and changed its starting point from the origin at 0. So now I want you to see the patterns because this is what it's all about. It's about picking up on the patterns for your transformations so that you know what's happening based on the location of the number. And we're using a little bit different notation now. You're used to seeing y equals mx plus b. Now these letters are changing. A, its slope, it's m. But when we talk about transformations, they use different letters because those letters cause your lines to do different things. So while you know how slope can tell you how to move to make your graph line, it can tell you if it goes up or down and how many to the right. Your slope will also tell you the slant. Is it a puff puff positive or a nice negative? Now I'm going to add more knowledge for your slope. If your slope gets bigger, then you are going to see your graph line get steeper, which means it's going to rotate closer to the y-axis. If your slope value gets smaller than what it started at, then it is going to be described as getting flatter and it's going to rotate closer to the x-axis. So your slope actually causes a rotation with your graph line. You just have to know, is it rotating to where it's getting steeper or is it rotating to get flatter? You also need to notice down here, slope has a sign change. There will be a reflection because if you think about it, from puff puff positive to nice negative, those slants are in different directions. So it's causing that change in the slant. Really mathematically what is happening is your graph line is flipping over the x-axis, which is why it's appearing to change directions in slant. Okay? It's not rotating, it's literally slanting a different direction. All right. Now, what are the other values? Okay, notice we have an H and a K. We're going to talk about H first, and I'm going to give you a memory jogger. These letters are going to help you remember when you see a number here inside of parentheses, you're going to know what changes are happening to your graph line. So here's the memory jogger. It's called IHOD over. IHOD has to do with the number inside the parentheses, so you're either going to see x plus a number or x minus a number in parentheses. What is that change? H is going to help you remember that this change inside the parentheses is horizontal. It's either a left or a right. Those are the only directions that number will cause your graph line to move. O is huge. O is going to tell you that your changes are going to be opposite of what you think. You associate positive with going right and negative with going left, and it's actually going to be the opposite. So if you see plus a number, that's really going to move it left. Minus is going to move it right. And then D is to help you remember that these are changing your x values, your domains. So IHOD, inside, horizontal, opposite, domain. All right, well, what happens if your number's not inside the parentheses? What are the changes that I could see? These have to do with a vertical change. This is your y-intercept. You've been working with a changing up or down graph line for a while now. I just never gave you that vocabulary. So, how to remember the changes for a number outside. Over is the memory jogger. O stands for outside. So you're going to see plus a number or minus a number, and it's either going to be after the parentheses or it's just going to be a number you see when there is no parentheses in your equation. V stands for vertical to remind you that that number outside can only move your graph line up or down. E Exact. It is going to move exactly like you are used to associating positive and negative with. Positive you associate with up, and that's exactly what it's going to move, how it's going to move your graph line. Negative is going to move your graph line down. And R is to help you remember that these are changing your range values because they're Y's. Okay, so let's look at the back and let's see if you can identify the changes just by looking at an equation. And we're going to check these in these order. We're going to find our slope. Then we're going to look to see if we have an IHOD, an inside number, and then we're going to check over an outside. So looking at the first one, our slope is 3. Okay, if it's getting bigger than 1, it's going to cause it to get steeper. Now, to know if it reflects over the x-axis, that has to do with the sign. If you have a sign change, well, it's staying positive. It's starting at a positive 1 and it's changing to a positive 3. So there is no sign change, no reflection. Now, IHOD, I'm going to use orange for IHOD. Inside, do I have a number inside the parentheses? I sure do. I have a positive 2. There's my IHOD number. H tells me it's going to move left or right, horizontal. Those are my 2 options. So I'm either going to put left 2 or right 2. But O tells me, helps me remember opposite. If I see +2, I'm used to thinking right 2, but it's really going to be left 2. And now over. Do I have a number outside the parentheses? And I sure do. I have a -1. So O, V tells me this number is either going to move it up 1 or down 1. Those are my 2 options. And E is going to be exactly what I think it should do. Okay, well, if I see -1 and I know I'm moving up or down, I'm used to thinking down 1, and that's exactly what it's going to do. It is going to move down 1. Those are the changes I would see in my graph line. Now, we're not going to use a graphing calculator to help us because some of these movements are covered up and hidden when we have more than one movement. So that's why I like you to know the pattern based on where the number is located. It's easier to see the changes than looking at a graph. All right, the next one. I have f of x is equal to, this is -1/2 times the difference of x and 2 plus 3. So again, we're going to start with our slope. And you should be able to pick out your slope number. -1/2. Okay, we're going to look at this in 2 parts. I'm only going to look at the number 1/2 to tell me if it gets steeper or flatter. The negative sign is going to tell me about the reflection. Okay, if I just look at the number for slope, is 1/2 going to cause it to get steeper or flatter? And that would be flatter. Okay? Now I'm going to look at the sign of my slope to tell if there's a reflection. And since it is negative, it went from a +1 to a -1. That slant line is going to go from going up to down, which means yes, there is a reflection over the x-axis. All right, inside, IHOD. I have an inside number, so it's going to be left or right. Those are my 2 options, so it's either left 2 or right 2. And it's going to do the opposite. I'm used to thinking left 2 when I see -2, but it's really going to go opposite, so right 2. And now over. I have an outside number, so my options are it's either up 3 or down 3, and it's going to do exactly what I think, up 3. There are my changes for that equation line. All right, the next 2. Let's see if I can keep this all on the same page. All right, again, start with your slope. 3. 3 is going to tell me that it is getting steeper because it started at 1 and it got bigger, steeper. Next, did it reflect over the x-axis? It's positive, so there was not a sign change. It started as a +1, it stayed a positive, so that means no reflection.